All right, today we are going to be reading from our reading textbooks on page 12. And we're not going to read this whole story today. We're only going to read the first part of it and then do a little paper. We are going to read a story called Rivers Rising today. It is about a family in a flood, okay? And they live on a houseboat. A houseboat is a boat that they also live in, right? So, yes.
In the Griffin Bear books, there's this guy called Ralph Furtop, and he lives in a houseboat.
He does. There you go. So, we're going to talk about some vocab words first, page 12. That book, yep. Yes.
But the ark is kind of like the houseboat.
Yeah. Yes, it is. We're actually going to talk about that today. So, we are going to read the first few pages. First, we're going to talk about a few vocab words, that not even vocab words, but like challenge words that we're going to see in our reading for the day. So listen to this sentence. Since it was raining outside, he put his slicker on to keep his clothes dry. What do you think a slicker is in this sentence, Keegan?
A jacket?
Yeah, like a rain jacket or like a poncho, right? Good. Sit up, please. For the second one, it says, Ray tied up the boat and stepped onto the landing. What do you think the landing is? Is he like landing a plane? No. What kind of landing is it? He stepped off the boat onto the landing. Boy Leon, what do you think the landing is in that sentence?
Going onto the landing onto the ground?
Yeah, like the dock, right? Good. So we are going to start this story. Like I said, we are not going to read all of it. And if I stop and I pause and look at you guys, you need to say the next word. I'm just making sure you guys are following along, okay? So make sure you're following along. Rivers rising. High water. Josh Fowler lay on the braided rug in front of the big pot-bellied stove. He marked his place in his book he was reading and looked up. Ma was rocking Buddy, gently humming Rock of Ages. Paul was sitting at the table reading the Bible, a mended fishnet at his feet. Behind the curtains, April rain splashed at the windows. It drummed on the tin roof of the houseboat. Josh rolled over, listening. Okay, so let's talk about the setting for a second. So, we know they're on a houseboat, right? Josh is sitting on the floor, laying on the rug, reading, right? What's Ma doing? Samara?
Rocking the baby.
Rocking the Buddy, the baby, right? What's Dad doing? Mary?
He is sitting down at the table reading the Bible.
Good. What's at his feet, Charisma?
A mended fishnet.
Right. So what might that tell us about Dad? Bella?
That he goes out fishing.
Right, that he's a fisherman, right? All right, and what time of year is it? What month does it say? Sweet? April, good. Ma stopped humming to listen, too. There's nothing like rain on a tin roof, she said softly. It's like music. First soft, then loud, then soft again. Josh nodded, eyes half closed. The low fire in the stove had sent a cozy warmth throughout the houseboat. The rain slowed, settling into a slow drizzle, gently pinging the roof. Josh yawned and closed his eyes. When he awoke, lamplight spread a golden circle across the room. Josh lay for a moment, watching shadows move across the ceiling. Behind him, he heard quiet clinks as Mom set the table for supper. Stew, he thought hungrily, taking a deep breath. He could hear Pa outside on the deck, moving toward the door. Pa's footsteps stopped, and Josh knew he was hanging his slicker on the peg outside the door. Josh was on his feet when the door opened. He watched as Pa ran his hand over his wet hair. Ma handed him a towel and gave him a questioning look. Pa nodded in answer to her unspoken question. "River's rising," he said. "Bad?" Ma asked anxiously. "Can't tell yet," Pa replied, as he sat down at the table. "But there was a heap of snow this winter, and too much rain this spring. Wouldn't be surprised if the Reedy River really leaps the banks this time." "Won't be any school in the morning then," Josh said, grinning as he sat down. "You've never seen a real flood, son," Pa said. "The Reedy's a right friendly stretch of water most times, but flood water's deadly. We rivermen move carefully when the water's rising." Mr. Fowler waited until Ma sat down across from him and then bowed his head. "Let's pray." Josh listened as his father prayed for God's mercy on the land. High water had always been a part of Josh's life. Almost every spring, the river and the streams that fed it would overflow their banks. When the water covered the bridges, the buses would stop running and school would be let out until the water went back down. The grown-ups kept a careful eye on the water level while the children splashed happily through their holiday. High water had never held terror for Josh. But when bedtime came, even Josh could tell this time was going to be different. He could feel the Reedy moving under the houseboat. "It's rising fast," Pa said the last time he came in. "A foot since sundown. She'll be over the banks by dawn." Josh hardly slept that night. He lay in his bunk, listening to the creaking as the river rocked the houseboat against the planks of Fowler's Landing. When he awoke early the next morning, Josh eased out of bed quietly, trying not to awaken Buddy and Ma. He pulled on his clothes and tiptoed to the door. Pa was already outside, walking along the dock. He had rope coiled around his shoulder and was measuring the distance from the boat to the oak tree nearest the
riverbank.
Thank you, Bella. Josh didn't have to use the ladder to reach the dock this morning. Water lapped at the top rung, and the houseboat rode high against the landing. Josh leaped across and ran barefoot along the planks to his father. "What are you doing, Pa?" he asked. "River is still rising, son," his father answered. "It's already over the low banks downstream, and it'll soon be over the landing. Help me tie the boat to this old oak. It'll hold the boat fast." So when it says it'll hold the boat fast, it just means it'll hold it still, right? As Josh helped Pa wind the rope around the trunk of the tree, he asked, "Are the trees on Crab Island as old as our oak?" "Probably older," his father grunted, giving the rope one last hard pull. "That ought to do it. Run and bring me the rope from the landing." Josh ran back down the dock and untied the rope that held the houseboat. Holding one end of the coiled rope, he walked back along the dock to the big tree. The houseboat swung away from the dock and drifted closer to the tree. Pa and Josh pulled steadily, bringing the houseboat gently to the bank. With swift movements, Pa tied the rope too. "Now she'll stay," he said in satisfaction, "and the landing will protect her from floating branches." "I've never seen the river rise much higher than our landing anyway." "How's it going?" Ma called. "You up already?" Pa called back, teasing. "I thought you were going to sleep till noon." Josh grinned. His folks were always teasing each other. Life on the houseboat flowed as smoothly as the Reedy River usually did. Ma cooked and took care of Buddy, singing as she did her work. Pa was a fisherman, but just as Grandpa had been. When school was out, Josh went with him, crabbing and fishing off Crab Island. Then they brought the day's catch home to sell in the little fish and bait house over Fowler's Landing. Ma gave them a good-natured smile and went back inside. Josh and Pa cleared the landing and dock of anything that would float away. Then they went to eat breakfast. Okay, so this is where we're stopping in the book today. So, we know that a flood's coming, right? Have you guys ever, I know here in Indiana we get a lot of things that say flood warning or high water, right? but we aren't around big bodies of water, and we don't live on a body of water to worry about, right? But I will say, if it rains really, really hard, I live out in the country, and if it rains really, really hard, then it's hard to get through a couple of the roads around my house because the water gets too high from the fields. So I can't take that road, so I have to go a different way, and sometimes that road will be flooded, so I have to take a different way. So it's not as big as it is about my house and me floating away on the houseboat, right? But I still have to be careful. So Joseph brought up a good point, and we're actually going to cover it, and that's what our paper for today is going to be on. Who remembers the story, the Bible story of Noah and the ark? Okay, so go ahead, put your textbooks away and get out page 7 in your workbook. Okay, so you should be on page 7 in the workbook, and we're going to read this little part about Noah up top, and then I want you guys to answer the questions, okay? In Genesis 6, verses 14 through 16, the Lord gave Noah directions for building an ark. The Lord designed the ark to float safely on the water and to hold exactly what he wished. Noah obeyed, carefully following God's directions. It took over 100 years to build the ark. Noah's ark was unique in every detail. It held at least 2 of every kind of living thing, plus supplies for all of them. It was completely watertight. Yet there was a window for fresh air and a large door through which animals and people could enter and exit the ark. Noah and his family lived for more than a year in the 3-story boat that he had so carefully built. So, what we are going to do is, I want you guys to answer these questions, and it's not going to be graded, but us in class, we are going to go over the answers after we answer them as a group. And people at home, you are just going to answer them and talk and fill this out the best you can and just submit it so I can see your work. But again, this page is not going to be graded. All right, thanks.